Eastern Front, Wehrmacht High Command, Berlin. A map room lit by harsh electric light, smoke curling from half-filled ashtrays, lines drawn in coloured chalk across maps of Russia. Officers muttered over reports from the front, the rhythm of frustration as steady as the tapping of pencils on mahogany desks. The latest intelligence arrived from Army Group Center. Another wave of Soviet T-34 seconds had cut through Panzer divisions near Smolensk. The reports were precise, chilling in their efficiency. 30 tanks lost, 40 more damaged. German armor crews increasingly hesitant to engage. The T-34, with its sloped armor and wide tracks, had transformed the battlefield into a perilous proving ground. At the technical department of the Army Ordnance Office, engineers were equally grim. Among them, engineers from MAN, Daimler-Benz, and a small contingent under Ferdinand Porsche convened, tasked with a single urgent directive: to design a tank that could survive the T-34 while matching the Wehrmacht's doctrines of mobility and firepower. The Panzer Kampfwagen V, soon to be known as the Panther, was born not from desire, but from crisis. Specifications were drafted almost simultaneously with the first prototype sketches. Armor sufficient to resist 76.2 mm Soviet rounds at 1,000 meters, a main gun capable of penetrating 75 mm sloped armor at extreme range, and a weight light enough for strategic redeployment across the Eastern Front. It was an ambitious trifecta, nearly impossible to achieve with the production and resource limitations facing Germany in 1942. Ferdinand Porsche, known for his unconventional designs, advocated for a complex drivetrain system, envisioning a powerful, electrically assisted transmission that would provide superior torque over uneven terrain. MAN engineers, meanwhile, favored a conventional approach with proven mechanical reliability, cautioning that Porsche's design, while innovative, risked delays and catastrophic breakdowns. Daimler-Benz engineers focused on the hull and suspension, proposing a torsion bar suspension capable of distributing the Panther's projected 44-ton weight more effectively than leaf springs. These discussions were far from theoretical. Each disagreement carried the weight of lives. Tank crews' reports from Russia detailed not only tactical failures, but the toll exacted by underperforming machinery. Prototype construction began with urgency. Steel plates arrived from Krupp, engines from Daimler-Benz, and components from MAN and Porsche's teams. By March, the first Panther prototypes, OSF, A and D, began rolling out of the assembly halls. The hull was striking in its angular elegance. Sloped frontal armor designed to deflect shells, a low silhouette relative to its firepower, and a lengthened chassis to accommodate the 75 mm KGAK 42 litres divided by 70 gun. But beneath the promise of this formidable appearance lay a nest of compromises and unresolved engineering tensions. Weight margins were tight. Even a minor miscalculation could lead to overburdened engines or strained suspension. Transmission systems were delicate, prone to overheating under prolonged use. Early crew reports, handwritten and precise, described hydraulic leaks, broken drive sprockets, and engines that coughed and stalled during field trials. The over-engineered complexity became the hallmark of the Panther. Designers insisted on combining the best of three worlds: firepower that could engage any Soviet armor, protection against enemy rounds, and mobility sufficient to execute rapid flanking maneuvers. In theory, this synthesis was perfect. In practice, it was fragile. Engine cooling systems, compressed in the limited hull space, struggled under extended operation. The interleaved road wheels, intended to distribute weight and improve traction, became a maintenance headache in mud, snow, and ice. Crews in testing facilities noted that a single damaged track could immobilize the pass tank entirely, leaving it vulnerable to artillery and infantry anti-tank teams. Despite these early failures, expectations remained high. High-ranking officers imagined a battlefield transformed by the Panther's combination of lethal gun and protective armor. The Reich's propaganda apparatus anticipated a symbol of technological superiority, yet the engineers were acutely aware that reality lagged behind aspiration. Technical trials at Kummersdorf were instructive and humbling. Panthers were driven over rough terrain, across frozen rivers, and under simulated combat conditions. Engines seized when pushed beyond 40 km/h on unpaved roads. Transmissions groaned and splintered under torque stress. Tracks derailed when traversing forest paths. Yet, even amid these mechanical frustrations, the Panther's offensive potential was undeniable. When functioning, the KJK-42 gun obliterated captured Soviet armor in demonstration tests, piercing T-34 sloped armor at ranges exceeding 1,200 meters. In Berlin, strategic planners wrestled with the paradox. The Panther's flaws were glaring. Unreliable engines, complex suspensions, and production delays threatened operational deployment. Yet these same flaws, embedded within a tank of unprecedented firepower and armor, promised battlefield dominance when successfully employed. This duality would define the Panther, a machine as feared for its destructive potential as it was for its propensity to fail. Letters from field commanders reflected cautious optimism. One Oberleutnant noted, "A fine weapon in the right hands, but prone to betray us when least expected." Engineers, too, began adapting, revising gear ratios, simplifying maintenance procedures, and experimenting with hull modifications to reduce mechanical strain. By the summer of 1942, the Panther had evolved from an abstract design problem into a tangible prototype. Its presence in training grounds and test ranges brought together an unlikely cohort: engineers, technicians, and young Panzer crews, each learning the rhythms and temperaments of this ambitious machine. Field exercises highlighted not only its strengths but its weaknesses, a dynamic interplay that would shape combat doctrine for months to come. The Panther's story was emerging, not as a flawless tool of war, but as a high-risk, high-reward instrument. And so, in the grey Berlin winter, with snow crusting the streets outside the Army Ordnance Office, the Panther was born not with the quiet efficiency of a perfected weapon, but amid the cacophony of compromise, urgency, and human ambition. A tank of unmatched potential, yet bound by its own intricate flaws. Its legend would not arise from perfection. It would rise from the tension between expectation and reality, from the calculated gamble of engineers and crews alike. In this crucible, the Panther's myth was taking shape, one misfire, one mechanical failure, and one triumphant kill at a time. July 1943. The Eastern Front seethed with anticipation as the German army prepared Operation Citadel, a massive offensive to encircle Soviet forces in the Kursk salient. Among the armored spearheads, the Panzer Kampfwagen V, recently dubbed the Panther, was finally poised for its first true test under fire. The tank, still a prototype in many respects, had already earned a reputation among crews for its impressive gun and troublesome mechanics. Commanders hoped it would tip the balance against the Red Army, but skepticism remained both from field officers and the crews tasked with driving it into battle. The initial Panther units, primarily forming the 51st Panzer Battalion, arrived at the staging areas in Orel and Belgorod in late June. Crews familiarized themselves with the intricate systems of the machine. The interleaved road wheels, the torsion bar suspension, the high-powered Maybach HL 230 engine, and the formidable 75mm QK 42 litres, divided by 70 cannon. Training was intense, but brief. The war demanded speed, and delays were not tolerated even if the Panther itself sometimes required hours of mechanical attention just to roll off the assembly line. Officers repeatedly cautioned that these tanks were not yet fully reliable. Breakdowns during the upcoming offensive were expected. Yet there was also a palpable excitement among the Panzer crews. For many, this was the first time they had access to a machine capable of defeating every Soviet tank they were likely to encounter at range. On July 5, 1943, dawn broke over the Kursk salient. Reconnaissance reports indicated dense Soviet fortifications, minefields, anti-tank ditches, and camouflaged artillery positions. The Panther, advancing in the vanguard of the assault, moved cautiously along narrow dirt roads, its 44-ton frame thrumming under the Maybach engine. Early engagements quickly revealed the tank's potential. At ranges exceeding 1,500 meters, Panther gunners obliterated T-34 seconds that would have threatened standard Panzer IV units. The sloped frontal armor deflected numerous 76.2mm rounds, leaving crews astonished at how resilient the machine could be in actual combat. However, the battlefield also exposed the Panther's vulnerabilities. Engines overheated under the July sun, particularly when maneuvering off-road across sandy soil. Transmissions groaned as the heavy tanks attempted to cross minor ditches, occasionally locking up and forcing crews to spend precious minutes extricating their vehicles under fire. In some cases, minor track damage immobilized Panthers entirely, leaving them exposed to artillery barrages or Soviet infantry armed with 57mm anti-tank guns. Despite these setbacks, when operational, the Panther demonstrated a combination of firepower and armor unmatched by contemporary Soviet designs. One documented engagement near Prokhorovka illustrated both the Panther's strength and fragility. A small reconnaissance group of Panthers, moving ahead of the main column, encountered a formation of 20 T-34 seconds. From 1,200 meters, Panther gunners scored multiple penetrations in the first salvo. The T-34 seconds, previously feared by German crews, were reduced to burning hulks within minutes. Yet, in the same engagement, one Panther suffered a transmission failure while attempting a flanking maneuver, forcing its crew to abandon the tank. Officers later noted in their debriefings that mechanical losses were almost as significant as combat casualties, a recurring theme that would haunt Panther units throughout the Eastern Front. Despite these setbacks, reports filtered back to Berlin describing the Panther as a formidable psychological weapon. Soviet memoirs later recalled that the sight of the Panther, with its long-barreled 75mm gun and imposing hull, caused hesitation and disorder in Red Army armored units. Even a single operational Panther could dominate a sector of the battlefield, supporting infantry and outmatching any T-34 inches direct engagement. This duality, lethal when functioning, disastrous when failing, began to define the tank's emerging legend. At the command level, debates persisted about deployment strategies. Generaloberst Hermann Hoth and Field Marshal Erich von Manstein both argued that Panthers should be used sparingly in concentrated formations to maximize effectiveness and minimize breakdowns. Crews, meanwhile, improvised solutions in the field, reinforcing suspension components, carrying spare tracks, and performing maintenance in dangerously exposed positions. These improvisations, combined with the Panther's inherent firepower, created a machine capable of extraordinary battlefield impact despite its engineering shortcomings. By mid-July, the Kursk offensive had reached a critical phase. Panthers spearheaded attacks against fortified Soviet positions, supporting infantry assaults and countering enemy armor. Reports from the 51st Panzer Battalion recorded multiple accounts of the Panther destroying T-34 seconds at ranges where standard Panzer IVs would have been ineffective. Crews marveled at the gun's precision and the armor's resilience, even as maintenance teams struggled to keep engines and transmissions running under extreme conditions. These dual narratives, triumph and struggle, would echo throughout Panther history, a tank simultaneously feared, admired, and cursed by those who operated it. The Panther's combat debut ended with mixed outcomes. Operational losses were significant due to mechanical failure, yet every surviving Panther had demonstrated a remarkable combination of protection and firepower that standard German tanks could not match. Soldiers and officers alike began to recognize that the Panther's potential lay not only in its statistics, but in the ability of crews to manage its complexity under fire. This lesson would inform German armored doctrine for the remainder of the war. Success with the Panther depended on tactical acumen, careful planning, and a constant awareness of the machine's delicate engineering. As dusk settled over Kursk, crews wrote reports by candlelight in temporary command posts, documenting not only enemy kills but the struggles of their own vehicles. One tank commander summarized the experience succinctly. "The Panther is a marvel, yet a beast. It kills like a lion, but it tires like a man." This sentiment, repeated across unit diaries and post-battle debriefings, would cement the Panther's reputation as a flawed yet extraordinary weapon, a machine whose legend was inseparable from the human skill and endurance required to wield it. The summer of 1943 was both a triumph and a trial for German engineers. Panther crews, having endured the Kursk offensive, returned with first-hand knowledge of the tank's strengths and its glaring weaknesses. In the workshops and field depots behind the front lines, Engineers from MAN, Daimler-Benz, and Porsche dissected damaged hulls, noting patterns that could determine the Panther's future. The narrative that emerged was clear. The Panther was a marvel of engineering, but its complexity was a double-edged sword. Field reports consistently highlighted issues with the Panther's suspension. The interleaved road wheels, designed to distribute weight and improve cross-country mobility, frequently clogged with mud, snow, and ice on the eastern front. A single damaged wheel could immobilize an entire tank. Engineers debated whether to redesign the wheel arrangement or accept field modifications. Some crews, under extreme conditions, resorted to jury-rigging wooden blocks or chains to keep damaged suspensions functioning, demonstrating a level of ingenuity the designers had not anticipated. The engine was another recurring concern. The Maybach HL 230, a powerful 700 horsepower V12, gave the Panther speed and acceleration unmatched by most contemporaries. Yet it was temperamental. Oil leaks, overheating, and premature wear were commonplace, especially in tanks operating beyond the strict maintenance intervals imposed in manuals. Mechanics noted that even minor deviations from prescribed lubrication or fuel quality could lead to catastrophic engine failure. Despite these issues, the engine's raw power remained essential for a 44-ton machine to maneuver in combat zones, where speed was often the difference between life and death. The Panther's armament, however, was widely celebrated. The 75mm Quake 42 litres divided by 70 cannon, with its high muzzle velocity and flat trajectory, could penetrate any Soviet armor at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. Crews quickly learned the advantage of firing from hull-down positions, exposing only the turret while engaging targets with deadly accuracy. In multiple recorded engagements during Kursk, a single Panther destroyed 2 to 3 T-34 seconds or kv/1 second before the enemy could return fire. The gun's performance was so effective that it shaped German tactical doctrine. Rather than massed assaults, commanders increasingly relied on ambushes and precision strikes to exploit the Panther's lethality. Yet, while the gun and armor drew praise, the complexity of the drivetrain often frustrated units. Transmissions, gearboxes, and final drives failed under stress, particularly during rapid advances or when climbing steep terrain. Repair teams, some sent directly from Berlin, struggled to source spare parts, as the Panther's intricate components were not yet produced in sufficient numbers. In diaries and debriefings, crews described scenarios where the tank's firepower could annihilate enemy armor, only to be rendered immobile by a snapped drive shaft or malfunctioning steering system. This juxtaposition, immense offensive capability counterbalanced by mechanical fragility, became a defining theme of Panther operations. Engineers faced another hidden challenge, the human factor. Crews unfamiliar with the Panther's complexity often caused accidental damage simply through inexperience. Incorrectly maintained tracks, over-tightened suspension bolts, or improper cooling practices could transform a formidable tank into a rolling liability. In response, German command implemented intensive training programs, emphasizing maintenance, troubleshooting, and tactical deployment. Veterans of Kursk were often paired with inexperienced crews, passing on knowledge that manuals could not capture. How to listen for early engine tremors, detect track misalignments, or anticipate overheating in different terrains. Despite these issues, lessons from the Eastern Front reinforced a central truth. The Panther's design flaws were inseparable from its battlefield genius. The very features that caused mechanical headaches, complex suspension, high-powered engine, precision gun, also granted it unmatched performance in firepower, speed, and armor protection. Engineers began to accept that perfection was unattainable under wartime constraints. Instead, they focused on incremental improvements, strengthening final drives, refining the cooling system, and simplifying maintenance procedures without compromising combat effectiveness. Morale and perception played a role as well. For German troops, the Panther became a symbol of technological prowess, a tank that could confront any Soviet threat. Post-battle reports describe the psychological impact on both German crews and their adversaries. Soviet soldiers, encountering Panthers in ambushes or defensive lines, often retreated in disarray, overwhelmed by the tank's long-range fire and imposing presence. German crews, despite knowing the mechanical risks, took pride in their machines. Field manuals warned of breakdowns, yet confidence in the Panther's combat potential persisted. Interestingly, the Panther's flaws also forced innovation on the battlefield. Crews developed field expedients, sandbags to reinforce tracks, makeshift oil and water distribution systems, and ad hoc towing procedures for broken tanks. Workshops adapted production techniques, substituting more reliable materials or slightly altering components to reduce failure rates. In many ways, the Panther's unreliability became a catalyst for operational ingenuity, forging a partnership between human skill and mechanical might that would define armored warfare in the latter half of World War II. By late 1943, the Panther had earned a reputation as both a blessing and a curse. Operational doctrines evolved to reflect its strengths and mitigate weaknesses. Concentrated formations, careful route planning, and the integration of maintenance units within combat columns. Commanders recognized that massed deployment without support often led to mechanical attrition outweighing combat losses. In contrast, properly managed Panther units achieved extraordinary results, destroying enemy armor at ranges where conventional German tanks would struggle, holding critical defensive positions, and bolstering infantry morale. In retrospect, historians note that the Panther's early campaigns provided invaluable data for German tank design philosophy. While initially criticized for being over-engineered, the lessons learned in the Eastern Front highlighted a delicate balance between innovation and practicality. Engineers, mechanics, and crews alike contributed to a feedback loop that gradually transformed the Panther from a temperamental prototype into a formidable, if still imperfect, war machine. The narrative of triumph entwined with failure became emblematic of the Panther itself. A tank that inspired fear, demanded respect, and required extraordinary skill to operate. Its legend was not born solely from battlefield success, but from the interplay of engineering ambition, human adaptability, and the harsh realities of mechanized warfare. By the end of 1943, the Panther had carved its place in military history, its flaws as much a part of its identity as its formidable firepower and armor protection. By the spring of 1944, the Panther had reached operational maturity in several key units, and its reputation on the Eastern Front was about to face its ultimate test, direct confrontation with the Soviet T-34, a tank that had once shattered German assumptions about armored warfare. The T-34 had evolved since its 1941 debut, now boasting thicker armor, upgraded guns, and increased mobility. The German High Command, recalling the devastation wrought by the T-34's earlier campaigns, positioned the Panther as the definitive countermeasure, a tank capable of outgunning and outmaneuvering its Soviet counterpart. The first notable encounters occurred during the defense of the Dnieper River line in early March 1944. Intelligence reports indicated large Soviet formations advancing toward German positions near Kursk. Panther units from the 1st Panzer Division were dispatched to intercept. Crews were briefed on T-34 vulnerabilities. The Panther's 75mm KBUK-42 could penetrate the T-34's frontal armor at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters, provided crews aimed at weak points along the turret sides or hull. However, these engagements would test both the mechanical limits of the Panther and the tactical acumen of its crews. The initial skirmishes revealed both the Panther's strengths and its vulnerabilities. German crews reported success from hull-down positions, where the tank's sloped armor and long-range cannon allowed them to engage T-34 seconds before the Soviets could effectively return fire. One after-action report from Oberleutnant Heinrich Müller noted, "From a distance of 1,600 meters, our Panthers destroyed 3 T-34 seconds within minutes. The enemy's fire was inaccurate. The Panther's armor and firepower are unmatched at this range." Such engagements demonstrated the Panther's tactical advantage, validating its design philosophy despite earlier mechanical criticisms. Yet the T-34 remained a formidable adversary. Soviet tankers employed massed assaults, combined arms tactics, and mobility to negate the Panther's long-range advantage. The Panther's engine, while powerful, struggled to reposition quickly over muddy terrain, particularly during sudden Soviet breakthroughs. Several Panther units became bogged down, immobilized by soft ground or mechanical failures. Repair teams often raced to extract stranded tanks before they could be destroyed or captured. Field reports described tense scenes where a Panther crew, fully aware of their firepower advantage, had to endure close-range attacks because the tank could not move efficiently. Casualty records highlighted another challenge: ammunition and fuel logistics. Panthers, with their high-caliber guns, consumed significant shells during even brief engagements. Supply lines, stretched thin by rapid Soviet advances, sometimes failed to meet demand. Crews reported situations where tanks capable of destroying multiple enemy vehicles had to disengage due to dwindling ammunition or overheating engines. These logistical strains underscored a recurring theme in Panther operations. Raw capability alone was insufficient. Support infrastructure was equally critical. Despite these challenges, battlefield adaptations emerged quickly. Panther units learned to coordinate with infantry, artillery, and reconnaissance elements to maximize their impact. Engineers developed field modifications to improve mobility in mud and snow, while mechanics implemented preventative maintenance schedules to reduce breakdowns during extended operations. Crews shared knowledge of Soviet tactics, noting tendencies to concentrate attacks on weaker Panther flanks or to use terrain to mask maneuvers. The iterative feedback between combat experience and engineering adjustments accelerated the Panther's evolution from a mechanically temperamental vehicle to a strategically dominant platform. By mid-1944, the cumulative data from these clashes began to inform broader tactical doctrine. The German army recognized that while the Panther could decisively engage and destroy T-34 seconds in isolated encounters, concentrated Soviet attacks demanded coordinated responses. Panther units were now deployed in mixed formations with Panzer IVs, Sturmgeschütz assault guns, and mobile infantry, creating a layered defensive network. This combined arms approach mitigated the Panther's vulnerabilities, particularly its susceptibility to flanking and mechanical strain, while leveraging its offensive strengths. Historians examining these battles later noted an ironic twist. The very complexity that had caused early mechanical failures often became an asset under skilled crews. The interleaved road wheels and powerful engine allowed for better cross-country performance than initially expected, once crews learned to maintain and operate the tanks properly. The precise gun, which required careful maintenance and handling, became a decisive factor when crews could execute long-range ambushes. In effect, the Panther's so-called flaws demanded higher crew proficiency, which, in turn, produced some of the most effective armored units in the war. Soviet records corroborate this perception. Captured documents and post-war memoirs describe T-34 crews' growing apprehension when facing Panther formations. Even seasoned tankers noted that a single Panther, strategically positioned, could disrupt an entire company's advance. Soviet officers wrote of a new monster on the battlefield, capable of knocking out T-34 seconds before they could return fire, its long-range accuracy and heavy armor creating a psychological edge as much as a tactical one. Yet, the legend of the Panther was still incomplete. Its mechanical fragility, the demands it placed on logistics, and the constant threat of immobilization meant that victory was never guaranteed. Each successful engagement was a blend of engineering brilliance, tactical foresight, and human skill. Panther crews learned to fight not only the enemy but also the machine itself, navigating maintenance schedules, environmental hazards, and the unforgiving landscapes of the Eastern Front. The lessons of these battles would shape armored doctrine for the remainder of the war and leave a lasting impression on tank design philosophies worldwide. By the summer of 1944, the narrative was clear. The Panther was no longer simply a flawed tank. It had become a symbol of the interplay between innovation and imperfection, a war machine whose very weaknesses demanded ingenuity, discipline, and tactical precision. In every engagement against the T-34, the Panther's reputation grew partly for its undeniable firepower and armor, partly for the audacity and skill of the crews who could harness it effectively. The legend of the Panther, forged in the crucible of the Eastern Front, was taking shape, even as its engineers continued to refine its design in response to the relentless pressures of modern mechanized warfare. By the mid-1944 campaigns in Normandy and on the Eastern Front, the Panther had earned a reputation that balanced awe and frustration. Its long-range firepower and sloped armor made it a formidable opponent, yet its mechanical unreliability often undermined its battlefield dominance. German engineers, commanders, and crews found themselves in a delicate dance with a machine whose brilliance was inseparable from its vulnerability. The Panther, in essence, was a gamble, a technical marvel whose operational success depended as much on human skill as engineering. The tank's complex Maybach HL-230 engine, designed for high-power output, was both a strength and a liability. While capable of propelling the 44-ton Panther at impressive speeds for its class, the engine's intricate water cooling and lubrication systems were prone to failure under harsh combat conditions. In the mud and snow of the Eastern Front, seals and gaskets would leak, radiators clogged with debris, and exhaust manifolds fractured. Field reports frequently recount instances where entire units were immobilized, not by enemy fire, but by overheating engines or burst drive components. One account from the 2nd Panzer Division notes, 3 of our Panthers were rendered immobile overnight due to cracked coolant lines, abandoned under the threat of Soviet encirclement. Suspension problems further compounded these challenges. The Panther's interleaved roadwheel design, though providing superior weight distribution and shock absorption, required meticulous maintenance. Mud, ice, and battlefield debris would wedge between the wheels, increasing wear and occasionally leading to track derailment. Crews quickly learned that a Panther, even when untouched by enemy shells, could be disabled by the environment itself. Yet this very suspension, when properly maintained, enabled smoother cross-country travel and better accuracy on uneven terrain, a paradox of design where flaw and feature coexisted. Transmission and drivetrain failures were similarly prevalent in early operational use. The gearbox, designed for 5 forward and 1 reverse gear, could seize under excessive stress or improper clutch handling. Panther drivers, many trained hastily due to the urgent demands of war, often lacked the finesse required to prevent such failures. Field manuals emphasized careful gear changes and constant monitoring of engine temperature, but under combat pressure, errors were inevitable. An officer's report from July 1944 recounts the frustration. We lost 2 tanks to transmission lockups before the enemy even engaged. The crew's skill could not overcome the mechanical strain imposed by the terrain. Ironically, these mechanical vulnerabilities contributed directly to the Panther's mythos. Crews who mastered the tank's quirks became almost legendary themselves. A Panther crew that could maintain operational readiness under constant threat of enemy action, with engines humming and tracks intact, was capable of extraordinary feats. Combat narratives frequently highlight crews who, navigating mud-choked fields or steep forested slopes, managed to ambush larger Soviet formations, destroying multiple T-34 seconds before a single Panther succumbed to breakdown. These stories, often celebrated in divisional bulletins and wartime propaganda, cemented the association between human ingenuity and the tank's legendary status. The logistical burden imposed by the Panther also shaped its battlefield narrative. Fuel consumption was high, and the 700-litre internal tanks provided only a limited operational range. Supply convoys were forced to traverse dangerous roads under threat of air attack and partisan ambush, while ammunition depots struggled to keep pace with the Panther's voracious 75mm gun. Commanders learned that deploying Panthers without thorough logistical preparation was suicidal. Yet when supply lines were secured, the Panther's firepower could decisively influence engagements, turning defensive positions into lethal strongpoints. Post-battle analysis revealed another paradox. The Panther's mechanical failures often forced tactical adaptation that improved overall effectiveness. Crews learned to position tanks strategically, favoring ambushes and hull-down firing over aggressive frontal assaults. Maintenance teams innovated in-field repairs, fabricating temporary solutions that allowed damaged Panthers to return to combat. Commanders began integrating Panthers with infantry, anti-tank artillery, and reconnaissance units more effectively. Recognizing that a tank's raw power could not substitute for combined arms tactics, the very flaws that had initially frustrated the German army became catalysts for ingenuity and tactical evolution. Enemy recognition of the Panther's dual nature also amplified its legend. Soviet post-war memoirs frequently describe the psychological impact of facing a Panther, a tank capable of destroying multiple T-34 seconds in a single engagement, yet prone to being immobilized by terrain or minor mechanical issues. Soviet commanders often reported that the Panther's presence alone altered the dynamics of battle, forcing slower, more cautious advances and the concentration of forces to counter a single armored threat. The Panther's reputation, therefore, was as much about fear as capability. The anticipation of destruction tempered by the understanding that the machine could falter unexpectedly. By late 1944, the German army had learned to embrace the Panther's contradictions. Doctrine emphasized preparation, meticulous maintenance, and tactical patience. Skilled crews were celebrated, while mechanical failures became case studies in improvisation and ingenuity. The Panther, once derided as a flawed experiment, had become a vehicle where engineering excellence and human expertise converged, producing a legacy that would outlast the war itself. Its legend was forged not in perfection, but in the interplay between complexity, failure, and mastery. Each breakdown, an opportunity to demonstrate resilience, each successful engagement a testament to the skill of those who could tame it. In retrospect, historians note that the Panther's flaws were inseparable from its legend. The mechanical gambit, the deliberate push of engineering limits to achieve unprecedented firepower and protection, had created a tank that demanded respect, fear, and ingenuity. It was neither invincible nor unreliable in isolation. It was a test of crew, commander, and engineer alike. And in that crucible of war, the Panther became more than a machine. It became a symbol of the intricate balance between human skill and technological ambition. By June 1944, the Panther had arrived on the Western Front, just as the Allies launched Operation Overlord. The timing could not have been more critical or more disastrous. German High Command, eager to counter the Allied invasion with superior armor, had deployed the Panther in large numbers to Normandy. Yet the tank's first encounters in France would test every assumption about its battlefield effectiveness, exposing both the brilliance and the fragility of its design. The 1st and 2nd Panzer divisions were among the first units to receive Panthers in early June. Crews were flown in from the Eastern Front or hastily reassigned from other units, many with limited training on the new tank. Despite months of preparation, the operational readiness of these units was uneven. Engines had been shipped partially assembled, tracks were not always fitted properly, and radios vital for coordination were in short supply. Field reports describe frantic efforts by mechanics to make the tanks operational in the days leading up to D-Day, often improvising with spare parts and cannibalizing damaged vehicles. The first combat test came during the hedgerow battles of Normandy. The Panther's 75mm KBUK 42 gun, capable of penetrating any Allied armor at typical engagement ranges, proved devastating against Sherman and Cromwell tanks. One combat, a report from June 13 notes, 3 Panthers from 2nd Panzer Division destroyed 8 Shermans advancing through the bocage without losing a single tank to direct fire. Crews marveled at the tank's lethality, and German accounts lauded its ability to dominate narrow lanes and ambush enemy armor from concealed positions. Yet the same reports reveal the mechanical vulnerabilities that would define the Panther's Western campaign. Soft, waterlogged ground in the Normandy countryside caused multiple Panthers to become bogged down, immobilized in mud and requiring towing by other tanks or tractors. Tracks broke under the strain, and transmissions overheated as crews attempted to extricate their tanks. A notable instance occurred on June 14, when elements of the 21st Panzer Division attempted to counterattack near Caen. Out of 20 Panthers, 7 became stuck in hedgerows or ditches, and 3 more suffered gearbox failures before engaging the enemy. The delay allowed Allied forces to consolidate their positions, demonstrating that the Panther's battlefield potential could be negated by terrain and logistics as easily as by enemy fire. Another challenge was fuel supply. The Panther's high-consumption engine demanded regular refueling, yet Allied air superiority and disrupted road networks made consistent supply nearly impossible. Commanders faced impossible choices: commit tanks to combat and risk immobilization due to fuel shortages, or hold them in reserve and limit their impact. Field dispatches describe convoys ambushed along narrow roads, with drivers forced to abandon Panther tanks to avoid capture. One commanding officer's note captures the frustration succinctly. The enemy advances with Shermans. We possess Panthers, yet they sit idle, awaiting fuel that may never arrive. Despite these challenges, the psychological impact of the Panther on Allied forces was profound. Sherman crews, accustomed to numerical superiority, now faced an enemy that could destroy their tanks at long range with minimal exposure. Memoirs from U.S. Armored units report the cautious approach adopted in Normandy, slower advances, reliance on artillery, and preemptive airstrikes to mitigate the threat. Even when a Panther was eventually immobilized by mechanical failure or terrain, its mere presence influenced enemy tactics, forcing delays and reshaping operational plans. In effect, the Panther's legend was growing not solely through victories, but through its reputation as an almost mythical opponent. Normandy also highlighted the Panther's logistical and tactical adaptation. German engineers began modifying tanks in the field, reinforcing vulnerable components and improvising maintenance routines. Crews learned to exploit the Panther's sloped armor and superior gun while minimizing exposure to Allied anti-tank weapons. Tactics evolved rapidly. Tanks were deployed in hull-down positions, hedgerow ambushes became standard, and coordination with infantry and self-propelled artillery increased. The Panther's complexity forced a level of discipline and skill that rewarded attentive crews, and the battlefield became a proving ground for human ingenuity as much as mechanical excellence. Air attacks presented yet another hazard. Allied aircraft, exploiting the relative immobility of Panthers in hedgerows, inflicted significant losses. Napalm, rockets, and strafing runs destroyed engines, tracks, and fuel supplies. German anti-aircraft units were stretched thin, and the Panther's size made them visible targets. The combination of mechanical fragility, logistical constraints, and constant aerial threat meant that Normandy was as much a test of survival as combat. A report from the 12th SS Panzer Division describes the duel challenge. We engage the enemy with Panthers, yet even without a shot fired, 3 of our tanks are lost to mud and air attack before the gunner has seen the first Sherman. Despite these challenges, the Normandy experience solidified the Panther's place in armored warfare. Crews who survived ambushes, mechanical failures, and logistical hurdles became legendary. Their ability to extract maximum effectiveness from a flawed machine exemplified the tank's dual nature, a platform of unmatched firepower constrained by its own sophistication. Tactical manuals and post-action reports emphasized the importance of combined arms, careful terrain selection, and meticulous maintenance. Panthers were no longer just tanks, they were instruments of tactical discipline, where skill and preparation could overcome inherent flaws. The lessons of Normandy would echo throughout the remainder of the Western campaign. Panthers, when properly deployed and maintained, could turn the tide of localized engagements, but unchecked mechanical problems, fuel shortages, and terrain miscalculations could neutralize their potential almost instantly. The campaign demonstrated that technological superiority alone was insufficient. Mastery over the machine, logistical foresight, and tactical acumen were equally vital. In Normandy, the Panther earned its baptism by fire, a stage where myth and reality intertwined, and where mechanical failure and battlefield triumph existed side by side. By the end of June 1944, German commanders were painfully aware of the paradox the Panther represented. Its firepower and armor were unmatched, yet these same attributes demanded careful handling, constant maintenance, and disciplined tactics. Normandy proved that a Panther was only as effective as the crew and support structure behind it. Nonetheless, tales of successful engagements, long-range kills, and crew ingenuity began to circulate, fostering a legend that would persist well beyond the battlefield. Even as the Allied advance pressed on, the Panther's reputation as a fearsome but temperamental adversary was firmly established. After the grueling baptism in Normandy, the Panther's story returned to the Eastern Front, where it had first been conceived to counter the Soviet T-34. By late 1944, German armoured units were once again engaged in desperate defensive operations as the Red Army pressed westward through Poland, Ukraine, and the Baltics. Here, the Panther's strengths and weaknesses would be tested in the brutal, fluid environment that had shaped its original design philosophy. The 1st and 2nd Panzer armies had received reinforcements of the latest Panther OSF G models, which incorporated numerous field modifications addressing the early mechanical failures of the OSF D and A. Sloped armor was improved, transmissions reinforced, and fuel efficiency slightly optimized, though the tank remained a maintenance-intensive platform. Crews were often veterans of earlier campaigns, combining experience in the Eastern and Western theaters. For these soldiers, the Panther was both a lifeline and a constant challenge. Its lethality was undeniable, but the risk of breakdowns, mine strikes, or mechanical mishaps loomed in every operation. Operation Bagration in June 1944 had shown the devastating power of Soviet armored offensives, and German commanders hoped the Panther could blunt the Red Army's momentum. In defensive positions near Lublin and Warsaw, Panthers were positioned to cover open fields and forest edges, where their long-range 75mm KG-42 guns could engage T-34 seconds and KV-1 second before Soviet armor closed in. Initial reports were encouraging. A single Panther in hull-down position could eliminate multiple enemy tanks before being detected, a phenomenon Russian crews would refer to in post-war interviews as the steel spectre in the woods. Yet the operational reality was grim. Unlike the controlled hedgerows of Normandy, the Eastern Front offered vast expanses and harsh terrain. Mud, ice, and snow compounded the Panther's mechanical fragility. Field reports describe incidents where entire platoons of Panthers became immobilized during forced marches, sometimes losing 2 or 3 tanks to engine or transmission failure before encountering enemy forces. One diary entry from a Panther commander in September 1944 notes, "We are beasts of iron, yet we break under our own weight. The mud, the frost, the endless roads it is, as if the land conspires against our very existence." Soviet tactics had also evolved. By 1944, Red Army tank crews understood the Panther's capabilities and exploited its weaknesses. Ambushes were staged in forested terrain and urban centers, where the Panther's size and reduced maneuverability became liabilities. Infantry, armed with PTRD anti-tank rifles, captured Panzerfausts, and Molotov cocktails targeted flanks and engine compartments, while T-34 divided by 85 seconds and IS-2 heavy tanks engaged in direct confrontation with careful coordination. Despite its superior firepower, the Panther could be overwhelmed when isolated, as highlighted during the defense of Brest-Litovsk, where 20 Panthers were reportedly disabled or destroyed in a single engagement due to combined arms assaults and mechanical failures. The Panther's reliability also suffered under sustained winter operations. Crews endured negative 30 degrees Celsius temperatures, with engines requiring preheating for hours before movement. Track links contracted, hydraulic systems froze, and lubricants thickened. Supply lines struggled to deliver spare parts, fuel, and ammunition, forcing commanders to prioritize which tanks would see action. In some cases, the necessity of constant maintenance meant that a Panther could spend more time in workshops than on the battlefield, a bitter irony for crews who had trained relentlessly to exploit its combat potential. Despite these challenges, the Panther achieved tactical successes that would cement its reputation on the Eastern Front. During the Battle of Narva in late 1944, German units used a combination of Panther tanks and Sturmgeschütz assault guns to delay Soviet forces, allowing civilian evacuations and strategic withdrawals. Field reports highlight several instances where Panthers destroyed multiple Soviet tanks while sustaining minimal damage themselves. These engagements were marked by meticulous preparation, careful use of terrain, and effective communication between tank crews, infantry, and artillery, a template demonstrating the Panther's ideal operational employment when its limitations were acknowledged and mitigated. The psychological impact on both German and Soviet troops was equally significant. For German crews, surviving in a Panther required discipline, technical skill, and coordination. For the Soviets, the mere presence of these tanks inspired caution and sometimes hesitation. Memoirs collected in the 1,960 seconds from Soviet officers recount the fear of encountering Panthers in open terrain. The moment you see the long barrel, you know your chance is slim. Our tanks were faster, but they were often knocked out before we could return fire. In many ways, the Panther's legend was forged as much by reputation and fear as by actual battlefield kills, a duality mirrored across both Western and Eastern theaters. By late 1944, the cumulative effect of attrition, mechanical wear, and logistical difficulties forced German commanders to rethink Panther deployment. Instead of relying on large formations for offensive thrusts, Panthers were increasingly used defensively, in ambushes, as mobile strongpoints, and to cover retreating infantry. Their strategic value was amplified not only by their firepower but also by the disciplined, skill-dependent tactics they demanded. Crews adapted to the tank's vulnerabilities, learning to coordinate closely with support units and maintain operational readiness despite scarce resources. Field modifications continued, with reinforced suspension components, improved transmission cooling, and improvisational repairs becoming routine in the fight against the relentless Soviet advance. The Panther's Eastern Front experience highlighted the paradox at the heart of its design. It was a tank of extraordinary capability, yet it demanded extraordinary care. In capable hands and favorable conditions, it could dominate a battlefield. In hostile terrain or under logistical stress, it could become a liability. Yet these contradictions, far from diminishing its reputation, contributed to the enduring mystique of the Panther. Survivors' accounts, post-war analyses, and veteran reunions all emphasize the duality, a flawed machine that produced brilliant results when matched with skill and ingenuity. By December 1944, as the Wehrmacht retreated across Poland and Silesia, the Panther remained a symbol of German armored engineering. Its operational effectiveness was constrained, but its legend endured, shaped by both triumph and vulnerability. The tank that had been rushed into production, criticized for over-complexity, and blamed for mechanical failures, had nevertheless proven itself capable of decisive action against overwhelming odds. On the Eastern Front, as on the Western, the Panther's story was one of contradiction, over-engineered yet lethal, fragile yet feared, flawed yet legendary. By early 1945, the German war machine was in full retreat. The Western Allies had crossed the Rhine, while the Red Army advanced relentlessly from the east. In this chaotic environment, the Panther tank, once the symbol of German armored prowess, was pressed into desperate service. Its legacy, forged in the crucible of design compromises, mechanical fragility, and battlefield effectiveness, would be tested one last time. The Panther OSF. G and late model OSF A were the mainstays in the remaining German armored units. These tanks were mechanically improved over earlier versions. Yet production delays, shortages of high-quality steel, and relentless Allied bombing meant that many were fielded incomplete or with improvised repairs. Crews were often undertrained, hastily assembled, or pulled from other units to fill gaps, highlighting the logistical strains Germany faced in the final months. Despite this, where the Panther fought, it often achieved tactical successes far beyond its numbers. The Battle of the Seelow Heights, in April 1945, illustrated the Panther's last stand in the Eastern Front. Positioned to defend Berlin from the advancing Soviets, German units relied heavily on these tanks to hold critical choke points. Field reports from surviving commanders described the intense preparation. Panthers camouflaged among ruined buildings, coordinated with infantry, and supported by artillery dug in along the flanks. Each tank became a mobile fortress, capable of firing on advancing T-34 seconds, Su-85 seconds, and IS-2 seconds at ranges often exceeding 1,500 meters. Yet even in these fortified positions, mechanical failures remained a constant threat. Tanks broke down under stress, transmissions overheated, and tracks snapped, sometimes leaving crews stranded in exposed positions. Despite these limitations, the Panther's firepower and armor allowed German forces to delay Soviet advances for crucial days. In some cases, a single Panther could engage multiple enemy vehicles with deadly accuracy before being disabled. Memoirs from Soviet tank crews recount the fear inspired by these machines. Even when outnumbered, the Panthers seemed to appear out of nowhere, their guns cutting down our tanks before we could respond. It was as if they were ghosts on the battlefield. Such accounts reinforced the legend of the Panther, demonstrating that its reputation was forged as much by psychological impact as by material destruction. On the Western Front, Panthers faced similar challenges during the defense of the Ruhr and the Ardennes. During the final stages of the Battle of the Bulge, the Panther's mobility and firepower were leveraged to counter advancing American armor. However, logistical constraints meant that many tanks ran out of fuel or suffered breakdowns before reaching the front lines. Crews improvised field repairs and scrounged fuel, ammunition, and spare parts from abandoned units. These efforts underscore the paradox of the Panther, a masterpiece of engineering that demanded constant care, skill, and resources to remain effective. As Germany collapsed, the Panther was increasingly used in defensive ambushes, rearguard actions, and even suicide missions against overwhelming enemy forces. Videos and photographs from post-war archives show Panthers abandoned in towns, on frozen rivers, or in destroyed bridges, evidence of both their strengths and vulnerabilities. Yet these images also reflect a remarkable persistence. The Panther, despite its flaws, remained a potent symbol of resistance until the very end. It was a tank that could dominate in skilled hands, intimidate adversaries, and embody the technical ambition of German engineering even as the war around it crumbled. The post-war assessment of the Panther cemented its dual legacy. Allied technical reports praised its armor and gun, noting that it could outmatch virtually any contemporary tank. The 75mm KK 42 liters divided by 70 gun remained effective against all but the heaviest Allied tanks at combat ranges typical of European battlefields. Survivors of the Panther program emphasized its influence on future tank designs. The lessons learned both in its engineering brilliance and in the pitfalls of overcomplexity would inform post-war developments in armored warfare across the world. Soviet engineers, in particular, studied captured Panthers, incorporating insights into the T-34, divided by 55, and later models, while American designers took note of its sloped armor and fire control systems. Yet the Panther's legacy was not purely technical, it was also human. The tank shaped the experiences of the men who operated it, the crews who navigated freezing mud, destroyed bridges, and relentless artillery fire. Letters, diaries, and post-war interviews reveal a mix of awe, frustration, and respect. Crews marveled at its power but cursed its mechanical temper, a dichotomy that mirrors the tank's broader historical narrative. In the words of one Panther commander recalling the final days of the war, "It could kill anything on the battlefield, yet it could die in a ditch beside you from nothing more than a broken bearing. It was magnificent and cursed in the same breath." In retrospect, the Panther's story illustrates the unpredictable interplay of design, ambition, operational reality, and human ingenuity. Its initial flaws, rushed production, complex engineering, and mechanical fragility became part of what made it legendary. Field modifications, tactical adaptations, and skilled crews turned potential liabilities into battlefield advantages. The Panther could dominate under the right circumstances, and its myth grew with each engagement, each photograph, and each veteran's story. Even decades later, it remains a benchmark for armored excellence, studied by military historians and engineers alike. By May 1945, Germany had surrendered, and the Panther's operational career came to an end. Many were captured intact by both Soviet and Western forces, studied in technical schools, and some even pressed into service for a short period in post-war armies. Museums today preserve examples of these tanks, serving as tangible reminders of both human ingenuity and wartime contradiction. The Panther's over-engineered complexity, once a source of frustration, had helped create a machine capable of legendary feats. It was a tank whose design flaws had inadvertently forged an enduring symbol of armored warfare. The final chapter of the Panther is therefore a story of paradox. It was a tank born out of urgency and necessity, plagued by mechanical issues, yet capable of remarkable performance in skilled hands. It was over-engineered yet practical, flawed yet formidable, fragile yet feared. The Panther's legacy endures not only in its influence on post-war tank design, but also in the legends of those who fought in and against it. Its story is a testament to the unpredictable ways in which technology, human skill, and battlefield circumstance can intersect to produce enduring legend, a lesson as relevant today as it was on the frozen roads and muddy fields of World War II.